Hello, everyone. My name is Apostate Aladdin. On today's live stream, I will be talking to my first ever atheist friend, as the title says. We met a long time ago, almost a decade ago now. And we've talked about this before multiple times, him and I, about how it could be interesting if we had this conversation on live stream, because religion has been a topic that was a focus of some of our discussions since the very beginning. And I won't give too much away right now, though I do want to vamp. I'm tempted to vamp so that some people would get the notification to start watching the live stream and they don't miss out on the first part of the introduction. But their loss, I suppose. So I'm going to call him Jafar or Jafar. I'm going to add Jafar to the live stream in 3, 2, 1. Hey, Jafar, how's it going today?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Long time no see. So this is weird because when we start talking, usually there isn't an introduction that has to be said.
Yeah, you're right.
So I'm going to start by giving a bit of an overview about how we met. Years and years and years ago, we both went to university, and we were kind of new in our environment, and we were assigned to be roommates, not really sharing the same room, but in the same vicinity, kind of. And that's how we initially met, as far as I can remember. What do you recall were your first impressions of me when you first met me?
Yeah, so like you said, it was very chance that we actually met, right? I just showed up. I knew that I would have a roommate, and there you were. First impressions, you were nice, easy to talk to. We got along well. Yeah, no, nothing bad really, just a normal person who you meet on that first week of school.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you remember the cliff notes that I gave you.
Yeah, I swear I'm not being paid here.
Not yet, at least. Yeah, and you say it's by chance, but there's a little bit of non-random factor there. I don't know if you remember, but I had requested that one of my roommates be a specific person that I met, knowing that he's a Muslim. And
I do remember that. Yeah.
Did I tell you that I didn't tell you that when we first met, right?
You didn't tell me at the time, but you told me later.
Yeah. It wasn't bigotry or anything, but I came across a guy who's Muslim and going to the same place I was going, so we decided let's bunk together. And in my mind, it was because I thought it would be easier to get along with another Muslim. I didn't want to, I don't know, be exposed to all the sins of yours. I say that jokingly, but that was kind of actually part of the reason. So
actually, I do have something to talk about later about that.
About what? Being exposed to sins?
Being exposed, yeah, to like atheist or sinful behavior.
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of that going on. I'm not gonna air your dirty laundry. I'll let you do it yourself. Yeah, and I remember very early on. I don't know how the topic came up. Do you remember how I figured out that you're atheist, or did I ask you? Or
Yeah, it's hard to, because I really don't think I saw you praying or something, and I'm like, hey, let me tell you about what I think, right? Because I was just trying to get along, like you would with a normal roommate.
yeah.
Maybe there was, something going on in the world, or I don't know. Sometimes those things come up in conversation, so it's hard for me to remember, but it was probably something pretty normal, I would imagine.
I mean, I think I excuse me. I remember I was the one who was eager to talk about it, not about atheism specifically, but I remember wanting to tell people to feel free to ask me any questions about Islam or Muslims. Excuse me. And because I wanted people to have an accurate representation of what a Muslim is and what they think like, and what Islam is. So I remember initiating a lot of these conversations early on.
Right. I remember that the conversations didn't really feel like they had that like baggage or tension that a religious conversation might sometimes have. It was more just like explaining the answers to the questions so that I can understand, you know. And I was actually going to ask you what your intentions were. And it sounds like what it was is making sure I have a clear idea, or what the proper way to view it is, I guess you would say, so that I wouldn't go away thinking, it's something that it's not, making the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, and I felt like I had this responsibility almost to represent my people in a sense. And I had this idea that most non-Muslims, at least in that part of the world, would not really be familiar with how Islam is really like, or how Muslims really are. So I just wanted to openly answer any questions that you had. And yeah, I don't remember exactly how we got to discussing your beliefs, but it was probably an extension of that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
what I liked, right before we go to that, what I liked and what I was interested in as well, and was sometimes I initiated the conversation, was just hearing the answer of an everyday believer, right? Because you can go and look online and people will be very contentious, there'll be heated arguments, or you can go and read like a more academic source. But it's interesting to hear what an everyday person who follows the religion thinks.
Yeah. And I was doing my best to answer whatever questions you had, and I wasn't pretending to be some person who has a lot of knowledge, but I had said, if there's something I don't know, I'll look it up. I'll let you know. I'll let you know later. Yeah, and do you remember what you believed at the time when it came to religion and faith and this stuff?
Yeah, so at the time, I mean, I guess the core belief or lack thereof is similar to now, but definitely have given more thought to like the nuances of different religions and, why people believe, that sort of thing. But at the time, in like a high level, what I believed is, no heaven or hell, didn't believe in God. I believe religion was more socially motivated. So in order to get everybody to go along with each other in ancient times, having a common interest, that sense of community. But it wasn't like I woke up thinking, hey, there's no God today. It was more just sometimes I would think about it if we're having a conversation about it, but just in general, it wasn't really a part of my life. So I didn't derive my morals from any kind of religion. It was more, what's going to be the right thing to do, what will make people happy, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember me asking a bunch of questions like, you don't believe in God, then how did we come to be? That kind of stuff?
Vaguely. What I definitely believed at the time and now is that it's okay to not have all of the answers. There are some things that we can't explain, and I don't think that meaning has to come from knowing that sort of thing. It can come from the opposite, actually, from knowing that this is the life that you have and you need to make the most of it while you're here.
I honestly, my memory is not the best, so I don't recall exactly what my reactions were to your faith or lack thereof.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I do remember some questions you had and how I tried to answer them, but I don't remember how I know how I felt about your disbelief wasn't in any way like, how dare he? It was more like, that's new. I've never met anyone who just God wasn't a thing in their life. Like,
Right. It's not like I was, wanting to not be religious so that I can do the things that religion says not to do, like drink or stuff like that. Or despite God, it was just that wasn't a presence for me.
well, was it ever growing up? I think I know the answer to that, but growing up, were people around you religious?
Oh yeah. I have religious family members and friends. In my family, they've always been more liberal about it, so it wasn't really something that felt super pushed on me. We did go to some religious gatherings when I grew up, but there came a point where I realized I didn't believe, and I said that, and there wasn't really any conflict. So I'm lucky for that.
Happy for you that it went that way. Yeah, I certainly remember that when you would ask me a question, it never really tapped into my critical thinking per se. Do you remember any of the questions that you asked me at the time?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because while I was thinking about that, trying to refresh my memory for this call. I think a lot of our topics are more surface level about kind of the end result of a problematic idea rather than the underlying ideas themselves. So, why do women have to cover themselves, for example, would be one of the topics, rather than why is there this pattern of infantilization?
Right. Yeah. I certainly remember one of the questions was how come a man can marry multiple women? And I don't know if you remember my answers to that.
I don't know if I remember exactly, but what I seem to remember is that most of the answers, it didn't seem like you were advocating for it. It was more just trying to explain. So sometimes it would be a historical context, like, well, back then the men had to take care of the women and there was war and that kind of thing. So it was more like a point of trying to understand rather than, no, here's why it's okay.
Right. Yeah. I remember saying exactly that back then there were, wars and women would be widowed. So someone has to help all these women. And it didn't cross my mind at the time that maybe I was just reaching at, grasping at straws to try to just make it make sense, because the resolution was, this is good. This is morally good. There's nothing wrong with it. So why is it good? And some of these things I am surprised because I didn't even look them up and come up with an apologetic point to say back. It was natural for me. Some I've heard, but some I just came up with, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense."
Do you think that's because you might have heard it at some point before, or because these discussions, when you would ask the questions yourself, would kind of have these similar types of answers?
Well, that's the thing. I think a lot of these answers I've heard and either just didn't ponder or forgot that I heard them at all. But some of them was just basically going off of a theme, right? Like once
Right.
you know that the theme is that the woman needs to be taken care of, you think of scenarios where, well, the woman couldn't have taken care of herself, and therefore so and so.
Right.
Yeah,
So if you accepted that premise, then everything kind of followed from that.
yeah. And to be clear, like one could argue that historically in that context, the best way to do it was so and so. But when it comes to religion, it's interesting how you were asking me questions about the current and about the things that are timeless in religion. Like that rule never changed about, multiple wives. But I was stuck trying to answer in the time that it did sort of make sense. And I never really
Right.
thought, like in my mind, I never really thought, okay, it didn't, or at least I didn't really acknowledge that question. So how come that clause hasn't expired in any way?
And I don't think I really pushed that hard on that either. Maybe I didn't make the connection, or maybe, you were my roommate and I wasn't trying to start anything. I don't know. But you're right. It didn't really progress past those types of questions, I think.
Yeah, which is too bad, because I wish we talked about. I mean, I'm sure we did also delve into deeper topics.
It's funny because we often will say to each other now, I wish I had a better memory on some of those details.
Yeah, we definitely talked about a lot since then. But I wonder if I know that every time I was the one who was pushing you to ask bold questions, because you were trying to be polite and not upset anyone, and I would tell you I don't care. I won't be upset by any question. Just hit me. Yeah, is that how you recall it, or were you holding back?
Um, I don't remember how much I was. I think knowing like how I feel now, I probably was purposefully not going as deep as I could have, just because you are an everyday follower of it. You didn't make the rules, although you're following them, I guess. But I didn't want to really judge. It's your belief. Um, but yeah, the conversations were more kind of theoretical and philosophical, almost like trying to understand things logically.
Well,
And
yeah,
I think
it didn't
in,
start that way though, right? It started off
no,
with superficial things.
it did, yeah. And in keeping it logical, I think I was probably trying to not bring emotion into it, as sometimes can happen with certain questions.
Yeah, I mean, I was never really sensing any kind of emotional reaction from you, but I guess that could have been a concern on my end. Like you'd be worried about me being emotionally charged about it, right?
Yeah, I wanted to have a friendly conversation. I didn't want to get too heated about it. But I don't think that I didn't ask things that I wanted the answer to. I think it was more a matter of, well, how far do I want to go? You've given your answer, and do I want to say, yeah, but what about this?
Right. But it wasn't a satisfactory answer. Like you still had follow-ups. You just didn't go there.
Yeah, well, it was more like, okay, I understand your explanation, and I think sometimes I did ask some follow-up questions to you. But if you've given me your explanation, that's what you believe, and I don't know if saying, yeah, I disagree with that would really change your mind or accomplish anything in that conversation.
I do wonder if you had pushed back a little bit more, if it would have been counterproductive, or if I would
That's
have
that's what
engaged
I
with it.
mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, would you get defensive and maybe not want to talk about it more?
I really don't know. Like, I wish I could go back in time and interview myself from that era. Because I know that the way that I think has changed a lot since then. Or at least, like, the conversations that I've had with you haven't influenced my thinking that much, to be honest. I felt like I wasn't really digging into things. I was just reaching for an answer and giving it to you because it wasn't that my belief or my way of thinking was what I was inspecting. I was just searching for, basically the focus was you and delivering an answer to you. You know
Right.
what I mean?
And yeah, and my goal wasn't to stump you or to catch you with something you hadn't thought of before. It was mainly to understand what your rationale was behind some of these questions.
Mm. And you said there was something about sin being around me.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
you were asking about my thoughts of you. I was just curious about your thoughts of me, right? Did I fit the atheist stereotype? Did I, conform to that idea? I did drink. Was that something you felt any way about? Maybe
Yeah.
it felt wrong to hang out with me, something like that.
So let's see. So you weren't the first atheist I've ever met. I met one atheist back where I went to school growing up, and he was an Arab from a similar background to me, and he was the obnoxious kind of really edgy, in your face, out of nowhere, make every conversation about God kind of atheist. And I wasn't even, I wasn't the kind of religious person who would bring up God in a conversation while we're just hanging out or something. So it was weird to me. So my first impression wasn't good, but of atheists in general, I mean. Um, but when I met you, I was just, that part of it didn't affect how I saw you. It was just a foreign entity to me that I'm trying to figure out. Um, when it came to the sinful things, so sometimes I felt weird about it. So I didn't drink, but you, one time, for example, I found a bottle of vodka in the freezer. I don't know if you remember that. And
Yeah.
I asked you, is this vodka? Or I asked something. I don't remember what I said, but I think I was, first of all, I didn't know that alcohol doesn't freeze at the same temperature, or I didn't think about it. But also, I was just trying to bring it up because I didn't know how to say in plain terms. I'm uncomfortable with having alcohol in the same, like in the same freezer as I would have food. Um, but I didn't have much food in that freezer to begin with, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, there were a
So
few of us, and it was small. But yeah, so I guess feeling like your food is sort of sin adjacent by
yes,
being
and
close to,
adjacent.
yeah.
Yeah, but by osmosis, kind of sinful. Um, yeah, and it was just kind of like, if I accept that you have alcohol in the freezer next to, the same freezer that I use, it almost felt to me like I'm accepting your sin and it's normalizing it. When if I had made a fuss about it and said, hey, no, like on principle, what you're doing is morally reprehensible, and I am upholding good morals, not just because I am, not just because you have to conform to my religion, but more like this is objectively the good thing to do, is like it's good enough that I'm tolerating that you have alcohol, but just keep it away from my stuff. That's the believer side of me was thinking that way. But I wasn't that like aggressive about it. I don't think I verbalized any of that.
I don't
I was
think you
just
did.
conflicted. Yeah.
Yeah, like I know in some religions, some people who are more strict about it will have separate fridges for different things, to store different food. Like I've heard of that in certain sects of Judaism, for example. Um, so I guess I can kind of see the logic there, right? Where if you want to keep that completely away from what you have, you would want it to be separate.
Yeah. And I'm sure like you are the kind of person that I feel like if I had told you, hey, in a nice way, I'm uncomfortable with having alcohol in the fridge, I feel like you would have complied and put it somewhere else.
I think I would have, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, it doesn't need to be in the freezer just to keep it cold, really, right? So could have put it somewhere else and then, I don't know, used an ice cube.
But I wasn't that bothered about it. I even forgot, and maybe partly because I don't even use the freezer that much, but it got me thinking about, so should I be morally opposed to you having a few drinks outside of the house and then coming back inebriated? Like, is that reaching too far? And then it felt like it is reaching too far. So why do I care where you keep your alcohol as long as like you're not forcing it on me? So I think I had a handle on things that early on.
It's interesting you mentioned that because that was my next question, right? So if it felt uncomfortable having it in the freezer, there are definitely some nights where I went out and then I came back, and I don't think I was like tripping over stuff or anything like that. But if you talked to me, it probably would have been clear that I had been drinking. Did that kind of thing also feel wrong? You mentioned that, it's kind of a fine line, but maybe you wouldn't have wanted to be around me after moments like that.
No, weirdly enough, I don't remember how early on after meeting you that situation has happened where, I'm just hanging out and you come back and from hanging out with friends and you have had something to drink. But I think by that point, I was still religious and everything, but it felt like I am repulsed by the idea of drinking, but like you seem like a perfectly nice, normal person. But I had this idea, the stereotype that drunk people do all sorts of crazy things, right? Like this is part of why I wanted a Muslim roommate. Was I didn't want someone to come back home like all loud and knocking stuff over and all that stuff. That was my idea of someone who drinks. Turns out it just kind of amplifies your personality, I think. You didn't seem like the kind of person who'd do any of that, so I wasn't uncomfortable hanging out around you. And some of the conversations were very good when I think we had these types of conversations about religion while you were drunk.
Not entirely. I think there were some, probably.
Some, yeah.
Maybe I didn't hold back as much.
I feel like I did capitalize on that. Like I've always noticed your reluctance, again, from a point of trying to be nice. And when I saw that you're more open to it, I'm like, yes, I've been looking for this conversation.
So alcohol is actually a positive thing when it comes to religion, you're saying?
That's misquoting. That's out of context. Yeah, so I didn't feel really uncomfortable around you being inebriated. But this brings up a scenario that made me kind of conflicted around the same time. Not exactly with you, but in a building I was in, someone was walking in with a box of beer, and I opened the door for them. I was trying to help out, and I was like, "Yeah, you can go ahead." And then I thought to myself, I just aided someone in doing something sinful. Many people actually are going to be drinking that beer. I hope he's not drinking it all by himself. And there's this idea in Islam that like if you do a good deed and multiple people, it's kind of like almost like an MLM, the people who do good deeds because of you are getting their good deeds. And I don't know if it's officially a thing or not, but the same goes for bad deeds, or so I thought. So I felt like I just helped so many people sin. And that brought me back to the fridge situation. So I was conflicted about that.
That's interesting. So if you had opened a door for somebody and they're not holding some beer, but they were on their way to go and sin, Would you feel similarly, or is it far enough removed that you can kind of absolve yourself in that situation?
Well, it's far enough removed and I don't know their intentions, right? Like they're not walking around saying, I'm going to go do something sinful. And they are a disbeliever. So a lot of the things that they do day to day are sinful compared to my frame of reference, I guess. So no, that wouldn't have bothered me. It's just this one was very explicitly, I am carrying alcohol and he's carrying alcohol and I just helped him through the door,
Right. Even though if you hadn't opened the door, he would have just opened it and gone through. But I guess in a similar way to the freezer, it seems almost like you're advocating for it. That's what you were thinking.
That's why I was conflicted. I was thinking, like you said, no matter what I do, this thing is going to happen anyway. Like whether you kept your alcohol in the freezer or not, you're going to drink it anyway. And I just made someone's life a little bit easier and didn't affect whether they're going to sin or not. So it should still count as a good deed. But I was just going back and forth in my head about that.
Did you find that after you were exposed to that sort of thing more and more, it became easier to not think about or have it not bother you as much?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember a situation where I had definitely had a few drinks and you were welcome to dance.
Yeah. That was fun. I was sober and I don't like to dance. Like I'm very self-conscious, but I feel like your inebriation and the mood, the people around us and everything made it easy. And I still had a lot of fun. I still have photos that I will blackmail you with when you're going to our office someday.
Yeah, I won't reveal too much if you just keep the photos hidden.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I still felt a little bit of conflict when I would go, like that was not at a club or something. We just went to some function and some people were drinking there. But I think I felt a bit more secure seeing other believers around me. Mind you, those are not the kind of people who would, go to the mosque 5 times a day. But still, there was the security that if they can be a believer while also not being completely repulsed by anyone who's sinning, then maybe I'm not the worst person in the world, for tolerating my friend being inebriated,
Yeah, I can see how you could rationalize it as well. This person is not a believer, so they will be judged. It's not on me.
Yeah, I mean, that part of it, even like I didn't go that far. Actually, let's pause on that thought.
Sure,
I'll get back to it in a second. I want to catch up with a couple of comments. First of all, Zakros, thanks for the super chat. He says my jizya, which is that that money that non-believers are supposed to pay to the state for protection. So yeah, you're welcome to be here. And he was asking, he was saying, I recently visited my village in Turkey. I was trying to give a pregnant doggo some food from a plate. The women lost their minds. They said the plate would be unusable. Yeah, there's a lot of superstition about dogs in Islam. And I had this belief that they were filthy. And to be honest, I still don't feel super comfortable around dogs, and I don't like their saliva or them licking me or anything. But I wouldn't say the plate is unusable. I just wash it really well.
Do you think that that feeling about dogs is because for so long they were seen as so bad for you?
Yeah, so the idea was ingrained since my youth that a dog's saliva is in Arabic it's najis. It's to the point that if you want to pray and a dog has licked you, or even if you touch the dog, because that's considered all part of the same, you have to do a certain ritual where you like clean yourself up the way you would for prayer, but 7 times, and one of them would be with dirt, because that's somehow supposed to cancel out the germs or whatever. I don't know if they even had a concept of germs, but the filth of it, which is kind of counterproductive. So yeah, that idea was ingrained in me since my youth, and I didn't come across a lot of dogs growing up. The only ones I came across were like street dogs, which were often very scary. Yeah, so it takes some time. And last comment I'm going to get to, for now. Mojo was asking, do you love stories and storytelling? I don't know if I'd say I love storytelling. Sometimes I like talking, so that part of it is telling a story. I do like stories, yeah. What about you, Jafar?
Yeah, I think I like the stories where it's like reminiscing on an interesting time that happened or something funny that happened in life.
I definitely do like reminiscing with someone else because that helps me remember things. So, yeah.
Right, like I didn't remember all of the details about the vodka in the freezer thing.
Yeah, that really stuck with me because partly was the science of it. I was like, wait a second, doesn't that freeze? Because it's a colorless liquid just like water.
It's funny, like in the same way that religious conversations were usually very analytical, so were moments like that. It's funny.
You were saying something about how I thought you were going to be judged, and that's not my place, kind of thing. About your drinking, right?
Right. Or just a non-believer in general, right? If there's something that you maybe don't agree with, I don't know if this is how it was for you or not, but it seems like the type of thing where you would be able to just say, well, they're doing the sinful thing and there's punishment for that. I don't have to stop them from doing it or get in the way or anything.
Well, I don't know if I was thinking about that at the moment because at that stage of my life, I had already had questions that religion couldn't answer, or questions about this religion specifically that weren't answerable. People have tried, but there's no actual good answer for it, in my opinion. And I had already touched on the topic of predestination and free will, thinking that if God predestined a disbeliever, non-believer to be born in their situation, even my friend Jafar, if I talk to him about Islam all day, if I tell him all the things that he's interested in knowing, not just forcing it down his throat kind of thing, he still is predisposed to not join my religion. But at the time, I put all of this aside because I was trying to focus on my studies and just going through a new stage of life. But eventually, when I got to that point of thinking, okay, so I do still feel a moral repulsion when I see a disbeliever doing a sin. So how do I feel about that? Do I just leave it up to God? Like God judges them? That actually started a lot of issues for me with my faith because I was thinking, what you said, it's up to God to judge them. That got me questioning, but is God's judgment method fair? So yeah, that was a big issue.
And also, if God predisposed me, but is then going to judge me, that doesn't seem fair either.
Yeah, and I mean, drinking aside, even if you didn't drink, and to be clear, like we've mentioned drinking a lot, Jafar is not like a person who has an issue with alcohol. Like he's not an alcoholic or anything. But to me, anything was a sin. Any amount of alcohol. It's not just that you were predisposed to not believe. It seemed inevitable that you are never going to believe, because I couldn't actually articulate what is convincing, like what is objectively a reason for you to believe that my religion is true.
Right.
Have you ever thought of that, or have you asked someone back then, especially, why do you think your religion is true?
Yeah, back then, no, I don't think so. My questions were more about understanding what they think of certain elements. So things that I thought were problematic, how do they explain it? Why is it okay for them? But I don't think I ever got down to why do you think it's true? And even now, I suppose you get to a certain point and eventually it's up to faith, right? You have to believe that it's true because I don't think you can really have any objective evidence about this sort of thing. So I don't know how productive I would have thought that type of conversation would have been. I was most interested in, I've been learning about religion somewhat myself. Oh, these things don't sound good. Well, I know people who, are good people and nice people. Why do they think this? Why is it okay for them?
Well, did you ever question yourself, like, why don't I believe in God?
Yeah, for me, it was about just the lack of evidence. I couldn't bring myself to just have faith that it's true without any sort of proof to convince me. And I know people will argue, this is proof or that is proof, but for me, it wasn't enough. I wanted, show me something miraculous or point to something that you can definitively say, okay, yes, this means that God is real, which I don't really think is possible to have. So I will not believe, and is, for me anyway, it's the responsibility of those who say that it is true to prove it.
It's funny that you mentioned miracles, because now, back then, I would have seen a miracle claim or a miracle as proof for God, but now I would even say a miracle is not really proof of God, right? And I think you would agree.
Right, yeah. Not necessarily, I guess. Maybe like if God came down from the heavens and healed somebody, right? But if somebody, I think you were talking about this on one of your streams the other day, if somebody had an illness and then without medical intervention, they suddenly became healthy again, that doesn't necessarily mean it was something divinely motivated. It could have been, some medical discovery that we've yet to make, or coincidence. There are a number of different reasons.
I mean, even in the frame of mind of someone who believes in the Islamic God, for example, within the rules of that reality, one could say, "Oh, it's the devil or a jinn," like the genie from Aladdin, who was commanded by someone else. Who it's taboo. You're not supposed to make the jinn do these supernatural things for you. Like, that's haram. But it's within the realm of possibility. So how do you know that? Someone curing a sick person is not simply a jinn doing a thing.
Or someone trying to be a false prophet.
They could be. I mean, when people were, was it around Moses? There were people who turned their sticks into snakes, but apparently that was supposed to just be an illusion, whereas Moses actually did it. So how do you know what's an illusion and what's actually real,
Right, yeah. So even something, I guess I would differentiate where a miracle would be something that can only be a miracle, whereas there's something that can not have an explanation that seems supernatural and could be something else.
I'm curious if at the time you had ever asked me, why do you believe your religion to be true? If that would have accelerated my process.
Right, because I remember after we were done school, we would have more conversations about religion, and you would tell me how, you're going through this crisis of faith and not really having all of the explanations. And you had also told me at the time, like you said just a minute ago, that you didn't really have the time or energy to get into it really deep while you were in the middle of your studies, right? So I wonder if asking that question maybe would have prompted a question in you, but you wouldn't have dealt with it then. Like, you put a pin in it almost, I know I need to think about this, but I can't really have my whole world shaken up while I'm, completing these important classes.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not saying I would have wanted that to happen, because who knows, I would have ended up in a very different place, or maybe not. But things took time to settle in with experiences and coincidences and my own thoughts. But it was something I was already pondering. So it wouldn't have been something that I would ask you, because the opposite side of it would be, why don't you believe? And I think I already did ask you that, actually, back then.
I don't know if I remember, but that is very possible.
And when you would tell me, well, I don't believe because there is no evidence for God, I would think, because it was instilled in me to think, that is an arrogant position to take. Because we're told that if someone, or basically this is conveyed as arrogance, because you're demanding something the way that you want it to happen from the creator, the biggest, greatest entity in the universe that's already given you so much. So you're being ungrateful by kind of being pedantic and saying, no, I want you to show yourself the way that I want,
That's interesting. There's no way to really, it's set up so you can't argue against it, right? Because to me, that's arrogant in and of itself. Well, of course we're right. We don't need to prove it.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of arrogance once you unpack it. Um, but it just made so much sense to me that this position would be an arrogant one. Um, and I didn't see you as an arrogant person. I saw you as someone who, oh, he just doesn't know better.
Right. So that's why you would want to explain more about the religion to me.
Not necessarily. I don't think I was. Yes and no. Like I was
Or
never trying to convert you.
explain enough so that I would be better informed to make the decision for myself, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it was never. It didn't ever cross my mind like, oh, maybe someday I'll see him join Islam as well. Um, but it was more like I want him to know the information that I know, so that if that information was a factor in me believing, then he has all the same tools. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
it's like giving you a fair shot at life. Um, and that got me thinking later on, how come like people who do get to know Islam, like most of them are not really having the same intimate level of knowledge as I did, but they're going to be judged as believer or non-believer, when they die. Um,
Right. So by having that same information, I'd be in a better position to choose to believe or not believe.
yeah. I still somehow it was paradoxical because I didn't see you as arrogantly choosing to disbelieve on purpose. I can see how you disbelieve because I would have too in your situation, you know?
I didn't have what I needed, and I didn't know what I didn't know.
And what you needed was this quality, this feeling that I could not convey in words, because all my answers, all my information that I could give you, you kind of have to already be a Muslim for it to really do something. You
Right.
know what I
It's sort of
mean?
like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. I mean, if I like some of the things that I remember mentioning some so-called scientific miracles, and I don't remember which ones exactly, but I remember something about the oceans that don't meet, and you didn't really like go investigate it or anything, but I remember your responses to them were like, "Oh, cool, like I guess." And I thought, well, obviously this stuff is amazing to me because I already know the backstory. I already am ready to see this is amazing, but to him it's just okay, cool.
Oh, it's kind of like if somebody told me, "Hey, did you know that God spoke to Muhammad?" Right? Okay, well, anybody can say that.
Yeah, and if I'm sounding conflicted, it's because I was, in my mind, I never really saw you as, oh, I gotta fix this guy.
No, no,
Um, no, but
no.
there's a lot of back and forth in my head.
And I can see why like an atheist position could be arrogant because, like you said, you knew that guy who was like the edgy, like Reddit atheist, if you want to call it that. Um, or there's the kind where I don't believe, and I'm better than you because like I'm smarter or whatever. But no, that's not what I think. And it is definitely a line that is easy to cross over sometimes for some people, or even in a conversation. Maybe you're not trying to come off that way, but maybe to a religious person it happens more where if you're saying, oh yeah, I don't believe, like that doesn't make sense, like, well, of course it makes sense, right? It's this big grand thing and we don't have to prove it, like you were saying.
And it's not only the arrogant atheists per se, the ones that are in your face or telling you, that's so stupid. How could you believe that? Are you stupid? That wasn't even the kind of arrogance that I was primed to mischaracterize your position as. It, like I said, it was just to demand proof from your creator is arrogant. Um, but I realized these power dynamics that were instilled with us, you see them reflected in so many parts of our societies where I come from, where someone having power over you, being, a teacher, a boss, a father, a mother, whatever it may be, there is a level of kind of entitlement to respect that doesn't exactly make sense. So it was a default to me that, yeah, you can't demand something from God. Like he's the one who blesses you with um, this proof. But if he were to give proof, then everyone is going to be a believer. Then everyone's going to go to heaven. But then it got me thinking, why not then?
Right, sort of like this respect your elders type mentality.
Yeah, but times 1,000.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned something interesting, that you didn't think that the arrogance, like, oh, you're so stupid, is something you were primed to mischaracterize me as. Do you think that you were primed to mischaracterize other things that I might have said, like arguments or points of view, to make it easier to write them off? Maybe not even consciously, but as like a common way of answering some of these things.
Well, aside from some superficial questions about things that look very like bad for Islam, like, oh, terrorism, that kind of stuff, I was primed to, I had answers for all that stuff. And it wasn't even, I don't think you've ever asked me something that was offensive on, in terms of these topics. You were never like, oh, how come terrorism or anything like that. But other than that, predisposed to the idea of a believing disbeliever, I never truly sunk like in my head, because since before I met a disbeliever, I thought there's no way these are normal people who think, F you, God, I just want to drink, so no. And meeting you confirmed that in my head, that, okay, they genuinely, even if they're wrong, they genuinely don't believe. So what was I predisposed to mischaracterize? I don't know, like the perhaps that anything you say in my mind never really sunk at first, because I was thinking, he's misled, he doesn't know what he's talking about, so I'm just like listening so I can say something,
Right. So in the same way, you told me about the oceans, and I say, okay, cool, similar to that.
Yeah, like you're not dissecting that so-called miracle that I gave you, and I'm not dissecting what you said very deeply. I'm just thinking, oh, here's what I can say about that.
Right.
You
Yeah.
don't know better. Let me tell you. But it wasn't me being condescending. But
No, and I never thought that you were trying to convert me or anything. It seemed like you're just trying to give me a more complete picture. Because, like you mentioned, like with terrorism and stuff like that, I remember when like the Charlie Hebdo attacks happened, and you told me, I don't remember if it was at the time or later, that you would go online and say, well, here's why it isn't actually right and it's not justified by Islam, right? So wanting to give people what you would view as the right idea, so they're not mischaracterizing Islam.
yeah, and it wasn't even coming from a place of me having heard apologetics and repeating them, because they weren't very popular back then, or at least like I wasn't in touch with this kind of discussion of Islam being put under the spotlight in any way, except by people who are just, I had the typical, oh, not all Muslims are terrorists kind of thing, or like most Muslims are not terrorists. Like that kind of criticism was the only one I was familiar with. But sorry, I kind of lost track. What were you saying?
I was talking about how, in the same way, you would want to give me a complete picture so that I don't get incorrect ideas or see the religion in a way that you view as not correct. You had mentioned that you would also do that to others, right? Like online. So it seemed like that's generally what your motivation was. It wasn't so much trying to convert or, push an agenda or anything. It was more just, hey, here's, why it's not what you think it is.
Yeah. And thanks. That reminds me. I wasn't actually basing it off of religious text. Like I wasn't, nothing actually deeply investigative about it. I wasn't going to look for what is the ruling about someone who drew a drawing of the prophet. What do we do about that? No, in my mind, it was just like you mentioned the Charlie Hebdo attacks, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In my mind, it was just like, oh no, like I think it's horrible to kill someone, even if they did something sinful, right? I can make posts about it. I can like go protest and tell them, don't say this about the prophet, but I wouldn't go kill them. Therefore, and I learned Islam, or so I thought, like I learned the real Islam. Therefore, this is not real Islam. And yeah, but when you look into it, there's a lot more to it when it comes to what is the law on that matter. Was it just the fact that random people did it? That's the contention here, or is it the act itself and so on?
That's the feeling I got back then a lot, where you were not really trying to find the rule that made something okay. It was just common sense or kind of applying generally good morals that people would have to the situation, right? So like I remember a time where there was somebody who we would see sometimes, and he was eating lunch with some people, and it turned out that one of those guys was gay, and he found out at the lunch table, and he stood up and went to the other table. And I remember thinking about that, and I don't know if I mentioned it to you at the time or not.
I don't actually. Yeah, I think I remember that from back then. Yeah.
But the point I'm getting at is I don't think I could have seen you doing something like that, for example. Like you might have thought, okay, well, that's sinful to be gay, or I'm not actually sure what your belief was about that at that time. But applying like a modern lens to it, well, so it's like, okay, yeah, that person is, but I mean, I am not gay. I don't have to like go away from this person right now.
Yeah, that's man, I cringe so hard when I remember that.
Lots of memories.
Yeah, good times. See, that's the kind of action. Remember the whole like vodka in the freezer thing. That's the dramatic reaction. It would have been me just like walking out or taking it and putting it on the counter and being like, "This is not going to go back," or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Believe it or not, there's a lot of this theme in religious stories about how someone would react, sometimes violently, sometimes not, but some grand gesture, like I'm so not okay with this, or this is so immoral that I'm going to do this gesture. There's a lot of that exaggeration. So to get up from a table just because someone is gay, that's so bizarre. But
and everyone clapped.
Yeah. And then like he got a house in heaven because of that amazing act. People could argue all day about whether Islamically we're told to do that or not, but this is definitely not an un-Islamic sentiment. Like if you truly believe that this person is such a horrible sinner, or doing something so gross and sinful, you'd want to get away. You don't want to be in their company.
Right, and that's like you get points. I think you mentioned at the time or shortly after.
Yeah, you're supposed to avoid sin, and you kind of made, at least in that person's mind, you've made your point by showing people how gross this is, that you're just going to walk away. You're right. I wouldn't have done that. And at the time, had someone said, that, or had I found out that someone at the table was gay, to be honest, I'm going to be apprehensive for a second. Like I'm not going to say anything to them, but I would just kind of cringe a bit, and I would think, like, I don't know if I want to hang out in the same friend group, or more like, I will, but I just have to keep in mind that he's gay for some reason,
mm-hmm.
or she's gay. But I wouldn't have, like, that's the thing about me. Even if I was conflicted inside, I wasn't going to take it out on the person.
Yeah, that's the feeling I got. That what reminded me was when you said, you weren't looking for, okay, where in the Quran does it say that this is right or wrong? It was, I know what the general guidelines are, and it's like applying those in a reasonable way.
Yeah, like I didn't feel like I could be doing something horribly wrong if I don't get up and do a grand gesture of it, or express that, by the way, I think being gay is wrong. I think, like, my religion already says that. I don't have to reaffirm it. It's not going to change the situation right here. But I just felt very conflicted inside, but I still wouldn't take it out on the person. It wouldn't make a difference. But I didn't worry that I was being a sinner here, because I felt like technically I'm not the one sinning. I'm not encouraging being gay. So I'm in the clear, I just don't have to cause drama for people for no reason.
Yeah, you didn't open the door for him while he was gay.
While he was walking with his boyfriend, so that would have been a no. No, I still would have opened the door. I would have just felt very weird.
What really made me think in that situation, the person who stood up seemed surprised to learn that the other guy was gay, and they had hung out other times, right? So really, what has changed between finding out that new piece of information, right? If they were friendly before.
I mean, in their mind, it's like finding out that someone is a pervert, like someone, they suddenly say, oh, and he's like, he does very gross, weird things, and you're like, what? This guy really? Like he seemed fine. So I was taken aback before to find out that someone was gay, but not to that extent, and I certainly didn't vocalize it that way.
Mhm.
And you know what it is? I've always thought, what is this going to achieve? Okay, so I've covered my bases of I'm not sinning, right? And I'm not encouraging them to sin. What is me doing, making a big deal out of it going to achieve? Is it going to make them less gay or convince them that being gay is a sin and they shouldn't do it? No, so I'm just not going to make a big deal out of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it, and that's similar how I felt when we would have our conversations. Like I wouldn't pry too much about, why you believe, just because, well, that's not what I'm here to talk about, and if I talk about that, is it really going to achieve the goal of this conversation, which is mainly to understand?
I mean, that is part of understanding too.
Yeah, I guess I'm being a bit vague right now, but to understand why the problematic areas, or the areas that I saw as problematic, were okay.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't as deep as why do you believe in God in general. At least usually at first it wasn't like that.
No, yeah, over time it definitely got more deep and talking more about not just like the religion in theory, but maybe the implementation of it, or how it affects politics. Like there's the Nipur Sharma thing that happened recently.
Right. That was interesting. You know what all of this gives me a bit of insight into how a believer thinks, or at least what I would think is a receptive believer, or someone who's actually trying to think about their beliefs, which is why when I talk to them, I try to treat them the way that I would have wanted to be treated back then. So yeah, I don't know if that's reflective in my tone or not, but it's all clicking right now.
Okay, yeah, so the way, like, you can kind of put yourself back in that mindset when you're talking to a believer.
Yeah, and I wasn't stuck in it for too long, I think. I think whenever I was in these conflicting situations, or at least in my head, these conflicting situations, I would try to distract myself to something else. Go away from the problematic situation in person. But it's honestly amazing how long I held out.
I was going to say, so you said that you pushed it aside kind of, to focus on your studies. So that was a conscious choice?
Um, not not really. So because my mind was occupied with everything else, I was trying to maintain, what I need to maintain to continue being a believer. Pray 5 times a day, and I don't not believe in God, so that can be put aside for a bit. But I wasn't conscious because I couldn't consciously stop thinking about it when I'm thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Okay, so it's more like you wouldn't ponder it more than it would just normally come up.
It would come up in my head, but the frequency of it kept increasing over the years. But at the time, there was so much novel in my world that it was distracting enough, you know?
I see. Yeah. So if you wanted to focus on it more, you would have had to make a very concentrated, directed effort.
Or sometimes it would just pop up out of nowhere. I never really had conscious control about over whether I'm conflicted about religion or not, or whether I'm pondering it deeply or not. It came and went in waves. But obviously, when I was in a phase of my life where I'm transitioning into, student life in that sense, and social life, and keeping up with responsibilities, much like how most people don't really think about their beliefs that much, they just do the routine as they're continuing life. But it just kept popping up every now and then, and more intensely, more often, till I had to face it.
And when you faced it, was it sort of all at once that you realized, hey, I don't believe this anymore? Or did it come more gradually? I remember we did have some conversations about it, and you were talking about some of the conflicting parts and how you were unsure. But I'm not completely sure of like the whole process and how that went.
Oh, do you remember those conversations? How many years ago they were, roughly?
Maybe like 2018. 19.
Okay, so 3-4 years ago. Yeah, but by that stage, I was stuck in this limbo for years where it was getting harder to maintain this bare minimum to be a believer, because I didn't believe in it, but I didn't acknowledge that I didn't believe in it. And I think a lot of Muslims are stuck in that phase. Maybe not because of conflict in their minds. Maybe they're just distracted and they haven't pondered things. But I was just like, it was getting hard to pray when prayer is a chore if you're someone who's easily distracted and is busy with other stuff. I couldn't get myself to pray 5 times a day in the times they were supposed to happen when I had a lot of big, huge, gaping holes in my understanding of religion, and there were no good answers for them. But I didn't think at the time, oh, Allah in that version doesn't exist. It was just like, none of this makes sense right now. It will eventually, or I'll get to it when I can. But eventually I couldn't put it aside. And once I did start really seriously, like, I'm talking like hours every day looking into this stuff, not just, Google searches on my own, but seeking out the people I could talk to ask these questions. That's when I realized, the first person I spoke to, okay, they sound kind of unhinged, or their answers aren't really all there. He's just human. Let's speak to someone else. And I just kept going down the list of so many people from different backgrounds, and I realized it's just a house of cards, Yeah.
Yeah.
It was sudden, like that, even though it was very gradual, that last bit, that one collapse was kind of shocking enough that it felt sudden.
Right. So it was gradual in the sense that it was building to that moment, but then the moment itself was sudden and jarring.
Yeah. Even though, like, one could see it coming from a mile away, even I should have, maybe I did see it coming. When it really settled in, it was shocking. Like, it took a while to actually, it's almost like colors were inverted all of a sudden.
Yeah, I remember you trying to describe it to me at the time, and like, if that is your whole world, what I would equate it to, I was trying to understand at the time, it's like finding out the world is a simulation or something like that. I did kind of get the sense you were heading there at the time, just because the way that you think about these things is often very like analytical and logical, right? And if there are these contradictions, eventually they will all add up. But yeah, it definitely seemed like a very stressful time.
It was it all happened, I think, not too long after that time that you described where I was talking about this stuff with you.
Right.
But yeah, it's weird how, like, once I've recovered from that shock, things started getting a lot easier, a lot quicker, because I was no longer trying to fight, the obvious or rationality in a sense.
Right. The biggest conflict that it doesn't make sense is gone at that point, and now you can use that new belief or lack thereof to kind of inform your thought process about the rest.
Well, it leaves you untethered, but at the same time, without the obstacles that the religion had in front of you. It's not that, oh, I'm allowed to do a lot of things that I wasn't allowed to before. That's not what I mean. It's I'm allowed to have a lot of thoughts to their conclusion that before I wasn't able to, let alone allowed to religiously.
You're allowed to say, oh, this just doesn't make sense. Or, why is it written this way? Or could it be human? Or, for the time it made sense, now it doesn't, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and before I would have that thought, like, this doesn't make sense, but the conclusion is there's something wrong with me. Why doesn't this make sense?
And now you could flip it then and say, well, actually, it's okay to say that there's something wrong with the religion itself.
Yeah, or I could say, why am I taking the presumption that this makes sense? The issue is with me. I'm going to give it the time that it deserves, given that it's something that it's been a part of my life for forever. But I can find the obvious conclusion, which is this is not divine, and it doesn't make sense if it's not adding up. Yeah. That was a very good point. Like in my life, that was things started trending upwards there.
Yeah, once the house of cards comes down, I guess you can use the same metaphor. I guess rebuild a better one. I don't know.
Or you could just start playing cards.
Just play cards.
Yeah.
Not rebuild a house of cards. Rebuild some structure that is more stable.
Or why build it at all? It seems like a stressful exercise when you could just play cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that metaphor can be reworked in a bunch of ways. I know that you and I think very similarly in many ways. I'm wondering how, if this cap of guilt or flaw, like a self-accusation of a flaw, if that held me back compared to you in some ways. Like, have you ever thought to yourself, something doesn't make sense, what's wrong with me?
I don't think so. So I grew up in a Christian family, which is a religion based on guilt, of course, but I never really felt that guilt with me. It was more like my parents would tell me, oh, make sure that you say your prayers and that sort of thing. And I would kind of just be lying in bed doing it, and I didn't really feel anything. It's like, all right, this is like a chore that I have to do, basically. I didn't feel like God was listening, or something tragic would happen. And what rubs me the wrong way sometimes is I'll go to a funeral, and then part of the service, if it's a Christian funeral, will be spent explaining why, yes, even though this terrible thing has happened, it's all part of the plan. So I didn't really feel like there was something wrong with me. It was more just, this doesn't make sense, and I don't really understand why this is something that my parents believe or that I need to do, if it doesn't really make any sense. And then over time, as I grew older, then I just realized to myself, well, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't have to. I don't think that it's true. There isn't enough there for me to believe it.
That's curious. It didn't ever make you feel like you're deficient and someday you'll understand it?
It's interesting you say that, because when it comes to, like, if we're using school as an example and there's a hard subject or something that I maybe don't understand, I'll think to myself, I don't understand now, but all it takes is me to actually spend some time trying to learn it, and I will eventually understand. But I didn't feel that way when it came to Christianity. Maybe because there just wasn't, it didn't feel like there was a path to learn it. It felt like I had been given the information that I needed, and there were just too many missing pieces.
I'm recognizing that in myself now, this pattern of, if I am faced with a huge challenge, I don't, or at least I didn't for years and years, think, oh, given enough time and effort, I can figure this out. It was established very young in my life, this idea that like, it doesn't make sense. That's because either it's going to make sense someday, because religion has been a part of my life since my youth, and I had these questions since my youth. Not in I don't believe you, prove me right kind of thing, but more like, if God said this in that story, how come not that? Like, I would see alternative endings to stories that sounded better, or I'm not really getting the wisdom in the story. Like, there was some story about Solomon, like the prophet Solomon, and how there was a female ruler of a land, and he was basically showing off by moving a huge piece of furniture, her throne, and having it arrive because he had his jinn do it for him. And she was so amazed by how much power he exerts over jinn and other entities that she converted or believed in God. And that didn't make any sense to me. Like, something that did it that wasn't even God. How does that an argument for God? But that theme was established like very early on in my life, that I had a lot of good questions, and critical thinking that was just, even if in a nice way I was told, here's the explanation. If that doesn't make sense, give it some time. When you grow up, you might understand it. If not, God knows everything. Your brain is, your mental capacity is limited compared to God. You can't expect to understand him. But that carried on to other parts of my life.
Yeah, that's interesting that for some parts it didn't, but for others it did.
Like, no, this reluctance existed in my critical thinking about religion. Without it, I would have been out a decade ago.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Are you saying that the reluctance also applied to your thinking about certain topics that were not related to religion, or only religion?
Yeah. Everything that I do, actually. Like if I face something like a colossal challenge, I have this sense instilled in me that it's not that given enough time and effort I will understand it, or I will master it, or do it. There's the very real possibility that I've always been running into since my youth of, you will not understand this. This is bigger than you. Because that was a recurring theme in my youth about religion, right?
Right. No, I can definitely see how that would carry over to other things if that's instilled from you. It's still in you from such a long age.
Yeah. And there was no compartmentalizing it in my head growing up. Like, religion is reality. So it's not like, oh, in the matters of religion, I can be limited, and in everything else, I'm, super. I can do anything. It was all one amalgam of, in reality, there's a lot of questions that you have. The problem is you and your questioning, or you not taking the answer, not understanding the wisdom behind the answer. So, yeah.
Are you finding it's taking a lot of effort to unlearn that?
Yeah. To the point that before this live stream, I hadn't made that connection before.
Interesting. Okay.
Like, I'm aware of that reluctance in other parts of my life, but I've never made the connection before today that is why. Or part of the reason why. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear stories of it's more difficult for some people to realize that it doesn't make sense. And in going back to Christianity for a second, I found that I didn't really have a moment where I thought, okay, here's all of these contradictions and it doesn't make sense. And, here's the research that I've done. It was sort of just, there isn't enough here, and it's not really something that I can ever learn, given that this is the state that it's in. But I don't know if other people who used to be, I don't even know if I would say I used to be Christian, because from what I remember, it was something that, I knew this was a thing that my family did, and I did it kind of initially without really thinking about it. But I don't know if others have that feeling where it is like this big revelation where it's not true. Maybe if they're in a more Orthodox family.
That's funny. That ties into two things I was going to ask you. First, someone, Food and Religion, was saying, well, fellow ex-Christian, and MKWKE21 was saying, I imagine Jafar is pretty open about his apostasy, or is he closeted? Would you consider yourself an ex-Christian or an apostate?
I don't think so. I don't really define myself like that, because like I was saying, I never really feel like it was this core belief of mine. It was just sort of something I did. Like, my family would go to church, or I would go to another family member's house, and they would want to say grace before eating, something like that. And I'd know, okay, here's the routine and here's how we do this. But I was fairly young when I realized I didn't believe. And it was more of a realization than me going from believing to not believing. It was me understanding what my true thoughts actually were about Christianity. And for the second question, I don't try and hide it. It's not really something I bring up if it's not relevant with family. So if I still go to a family member's house and they're talking about religion, or they want to say grace or something, I'm not going to say, actually, I don't believe, never mind. But if my family asks me, I tell them the truth, and that has happened.
But is it a common occurrence that religion would come up in your day-to-day life?
No.
Like,
No.
do you ever feel like you have to tiptoe around that you're not a believer?
No, I don't think so. So even my parents, like my mom has said to me before, I know you don't believe, but times like this make me think there's something out there, right? So I'm pretty open with it, and they know, and we'll have conversations about it. And it's friendly, not argumentative or anything. It's just you believe this, I believe that.
Well, do you think, hypothetically, if you grew up in a society where not only were your family Christians who, were pretty kind of lax about it, but in a society where your whole community was very, I'm not going to say extremist even, but very by the book Christian, do you think it would have affected how you thought and your realizations at that age?
I think I definitely would. I think if I grew up and it was a bigger part of my life, and it was, there was more of a priority on it. Like we would go kind of not every weekend to church, just sometimes you're like at Christmas, that kind of thing. But if it was, you adhere to it every day and you have to say grace before dinner, you have to say your prayers, you go to church as often as you can. I think probably I would have had a harder time coming to that realization, and also would have had a harder time talking to family about it.
Yeah.
Ex-Christian is less of a label to this person. Yeah, I think similar. If you want to describe it that way, I guess it's technically true growing up in a Christian family.
But you never really have that need for the label in your life.
Right. I think for some it's more important because it was a bigger part of their life and they feel like it had more of an impact on them, and it was harder for them to leave.
Mm-hmm. And for food and religion, I suppose, see, that's something about being from an Arab background. People will have to presume that you're in one category or another. But you, given your racial, ethnic, whatever cultural background, no one looks at you and thinks, are you Christian or are you atheist? It's just, you just exist,
You see my picture here.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, usually people don't assume that I'm one religion or another. So it often doesn't come up, and I have that good fortune.
Yeah. Do you feel like taking some questions from the comments?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. We'll put a ticker up here or something here to remind people, ask your questions in the comments. Yeah. I had a lot actually on my mind this morning to ask you about, but I completely forgot.
Maybe it'll come back with some of these questions.
Yeah, maybe. And I'm wondering if you ever noticed like, would you have called me a Muslim, or would you have thought of me as a Muslim back when we first met? Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely would. But what I was thinking about too, that's interesting, in the way we hung out then versus now, religion aside, it's very similar, right? We would make the same types of jokes, do the same types of things. So that really hasn't changed. And often that's what we did, right? We talked about religion at times, but I wouldn't say that defined our friendship. So the way I saw you is, okay, yes, this is your religion, but when I think of you, that wasn't the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh, did you ever, when was it approximately that you started thinking of me as not Muslim?
When I met you and I found out that you were, oh, sorry, maybe, okay. Do you mean, do I not think of you being
No,
Muslim?
I know it didn't come up in your mind whenever you thought of me. Like, it wasn't a
I mean,
defining.
when I thought this is no longer what you believe.
Yeah, like, was it when I explicitly told you, hey, like, I did my research and I came to these amazing realizations, or was it before that you just, in your mind, you acknowledged I'm not really Muslim?
I knew that you were questioning for a while, and what I likened it to, although it wasn't exactly the same, I imagine, was me growing up and kind of realizing, okay, this doesn't really make sense, and here's what I believe now. There's that transition period where, you're kind of doing it, like you said, you'll still do the prayers, it'll make sense eventually, and then, eventually it doesn't. So in that transition period, yeah, I guess I would still think of you as Muslim, but questioning and not in it to the same degree that you once were.
Well, did you think of it as an inevitability?
It seemed likely. I don't know if inevitability, but yeah, I was pretty sure that's where you were headed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I do have some questions, unless you had something you wanted to say.
Oh, yeah. Questions are good.
So Howie is asking, was Jafar your catalyst for eventually coming out as a free thinker? I don't know how you feel about that label, free thinker, but I'll get to that in a second. What I'm hearing is that you went through stages and it was a gradual process. I guess this question is more for me. Yeah, sometimes people use the phrase free thinker as some kind of condescending, I'm a free thinker, a free thinker like me thinks so and so. But I get what you mean. My thinking was not constrained by religion anymore, I suppose. I don't think so. I don't know how much of a role it played. Like, at least at first, our conversations did not really play a role in me having thoughts that were conflicting with religion or not being able to make sense out of it. But actually going down the line, yes, he was a catalyst in the sense that it gave me a space to have these conversations. And with someone who's not trying to win, any kind of argument.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, a lot of our conversations didn't go as deep as they do now. So it probably didn't make as much of an impact because of that. But in the sense that we could talk about it, I can see that.
I think I definitely used not just you, but a bunch of other friends, including a bunch of Muslim friends, and more often them than you, to ask them how they processed some of these conflicting thoughts that I had. But your point of view was more of like, I was asking you questions, but apprehensively, I'm thinking, I don't want his way of thinking to influence mine. I'm just curious how he thinks. But it was a catalyst, for sure. I wouldn't have, but the thing is, though, it wasn't an influence. It was more like the room for me to have these conversations and thoughts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't think that I converted you or anything like that.
No. Which brings us to this question. Maybe you talked about it and I must have missed it. Did you try converting Jafar? No, it was never about that. And yeah, he was never really trying to convert me to atheism or anything like that. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned converting to atheism, because I know some people call atheism a religion.
Yeah, I keep hearing that on and on. What are your thoughts on that? Is atheism a religion?
I don't think so, because for me, it's just the absence of that belief, right? It's not waking up and deciding, I don't believe in God and I'm going to live my life because I don't think God exists. It's just not a part of my life. My decisions aren't guided by religion. So I wouldn't call it a religion. It's like, in the same way, if you have an old friend that you don't talk to in a while, maybe this is a bit of a weird analogy, but then, like a year goes by and you never really hear from them. They're not on your mind, right? And then if you see them again, or if religion comes up in conversation again, you might think about them, but it's not a part of your life.
That makes sense. The next question from Islam Channel USA. He says, AA's first atheist friend. The question is for you. Do you ever let go of thinking and just be maybe in a sitting meditation where there are no thoughts?
I've been trying to get more into mindfulness. So yeah, I do try and do that sometimes, just sitting by myself, clearing my mind, letting everything go and trying to relax, mainly for the relaxation and letting the stress go more than anything spiritually, though.
Couple of things here. Paul is asking, who's the character in his profile picture?
It's Jafar from Aladdin, but I picked a frame that is only on screen for like a second.
Right. So you tricked them.
It's when Aladdin falls in the cave and he thinks he has the lamp.
Right. Food and Religion is asking, or saying, that's like saying not collecting stamps is a hobby, about atheism being a religion.
That's a better analogy.
Yeah, that's a good one. Hector is saying, you have to have faith to believe God doesn't exist because you cannot prove it. So,
well, it's, for me, the burden of proof is on the one making the claim, right? The status quo is, humans exist before religion exists. No one has talked about religion. And then one day somebody says, hey, there's God, and here's how the earth was created, and you have to believe in God. So the person asserting that claim, it's their responsibility to supply evidence for that claim. Otherwise, what is the reason to believe? It's more complex, basically, to believe that than the natural status quo. And maybe more complex is not the right way to explain it, because I can see people saying, "Oh, you're just lazy and don't want to believe." But it's hard to explain and put into words. I hope I'm getting this across, but it's basically there's more to it, so you need to explain more as well.
Well, let me put my believer hat on for a second. I feel like in a believer's mind, or many of them, it's almost by default that, where did we come from? God. So it's on you to explain how God doesn't exist, or more like to ask you this in a direct manner. Do you believe God doesn't exist?
Yeah, that's interesting. I believe that there is no way to know, but the default is there is no God, because people exist. You said the default is people exist because of God. The default is people exist. Now, when you try to explain that, you're bringing a new idea, and you need to back that idea up. But I say that it's not possible to prove because it's an unfalsifiable claim, right? There's God, but you can't see God, and you can't interact with God. Or some people say that you can talk to God, but that's more of a feeling that people have. So if it's so intangible and there's no way to prove or disprove, there's the argument of the flying spaghetti monster, right? How do you know that there isn't this creature in outer space made of pasta?
Well, then the follow-up would be, and who made the humans?
Right, yeah. So there are scientific theories, but I don't have all of the answers, and I think that that's okay. There are certain things that we can't explain, but that doesn't necessarily mean that God is the answer.
I would go a step further and say that's the wrong question to ask, because it makes a presumption. Who made the humans?
Yeah, it does. It presumes that there is a creator, right?
Right.
You could say, well, there's the Big Bang and then evolution. Okay, what caused the Big Bang? What was there before that? So you can work your way back infinitely, and eventually you get to a point where we don't know the answer.
Right. Let's see. You've got a bunch of other questions. So, Little Bear is asking, question to Jafar: does he think that the universe is beautiful?
I do, yes. I think there's a lot of beauty in the universe, and even without religion, you can still have those types of experiences. You can find beauty in nature or in relationships with friends and family. So a lot of different ways that you can find beauty in the world without religion.
Another question, though I think this one might be for me. The Black Knight is asking, how do you deal with the idea of having to lie to everyone about Islam? I have been an atheist for 2 years, and it's tiring to lie. To be honest, it's I empathize with you, and I'm sorry you're in that situation. It's really difficult. I've gotten to a point where having to lie about my beliefs, which is a situation that Jafar, I don't know why I'm mixing up the Arabic and English pronunciation. Jafar doesn't have to run into often, but I had to, and still kind of have to make that decision. Do I mask that I don't believe? Because it comes up very often that someone presumes that you believe, or it's not that I want to bring it up in conversation, but by admitting or by not going with the flow, you're basically telling them, I don't believe, without trying to make it about you or about your disbelief. It did get exhausting for me to lie, and I've gotten to a point where I don't anymore. So I have the luxury of being able to not, or have the space and means to face whatever repercussions there may be, or not have as many repercussions depending on the context. But it's difficult, and I would say try to find outlets for that frustration, and try to surround yourself with people who aren't as obsessed with these topics, which is difficult to find in many religious environments and countries. It's part of their day to day, but I hope you find your crowd. That helps. Let's see what else. So MKWKE21 was saying, it's funny because if we really believed in our religions, we would want the people to care about to not burn in hell for eternity. Yet I never had that mentality during my believing years either. Let's see how I can spin this for Jafar to answer. If you believed in heaven and hell, would you feel like it's your duty to make everyone else believe?
If I truly believed that people were going to be tortured for eternity, then I think, yes, I would want to help them to avoid that fate.
Would you go out of your way to try to do it?
It is very difficult to put myself in that mindset. I want to say yes. I don't know with 100% certainty, because there are a lot of things where, you can believe something is morally right, but you don't necessarily act on it, right? So I don't know, becoming a vegetarian or something, you don't want the animals to die.
Right.
But I still eat meat. Not necessarily the same, but I like to think that I would.
You like to think that you would, but I guess it's hard to put yourself in that
It's hard to put in those shoes. At the very least, I know I would not want those people to go to hell, and I would try to explain to them, here's why you have to believe in this to avoid it. The extent to which I would go, that's what I'm not certain of.
Fair enough. What else? Yeah, this one's for me. Food and Religion is asking, is the name Aladdin means on the deen, as in Ala ad-Din? Because I'm not sure. No, it means one who raises or praises religion or represents it in a good way or something of that sort. So, kind of ironic. Intentionally. If you know me, you know that I like to make these jokes and puns. So, yeah. Another question. Well, there was one of these questions for you first from Islam Channel USA. Do you miss specific things when you were a Christian, like blindly believing as in ignorance is bliss, to going to lunch after church? Yeah, do you miss these things?
Okay, like an event that's in honor of some Christian celebration, or even just church, like this person mentioned. Yeah, so my family is the ones who are religious are pretty liberal about it. So really, we didn't use religion often as an excuse for doing these types of things. We would just, let's everybody get together and have a meal and see each other. So I still get that kind of interaction, and I was very young, so I didn't feel a strong connection to the Christian community. It was mainly just my family who I was interacting with, who was also religious.
Yeah, and the first part of that, did you even ever feel that blindly believing as ignorance is bliss?
Yeah, I was more just going along with the routine of it and not really questioning the reasoning behind it. So I didn't really think about it too much, but I don't know if I would say I believed in it. It was
So
more just
for
trying to
context, how
figure it
old
out.
were you? Because,
Yeah, so I realized that I didn't believe probably around like 12 or 13 or so. So in the few years before this are what I remember most. So maybe 8 to 12.
right. Which is an age when we're all just going along with whatever our parents say.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think part of it was also, growing up and doing the teenage thing and questioning your parents in other ways. But I don't think becoming an atheist was teenage rebellion. It was more just giving me the space, I guess, to question that and to think for myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other side of that question is, for me, do you miss not knowing the things you know? As in, there's peace in not knowing in a weird way. No, because when I look back, some ex-Muslims look back and think I miss the days of being a believer where it brought me peace and I was just confident of everything without any doubt, without having to know facts that are conflicting that would cause doubt. As far back as I go, I had questions. Like, I believed it. The questions weren't coming from a place of, skepticism in the truth of the religion, or that if these questions aren't answered, therefore the religion is false. It was just trying to understand it. And since I remember, it was never fully satisfactory. You know, like when I was younger, there were a lot of things about miracles and magic and all that kind of stuff that I used to take the answer of, oh, all the miracles stopped with the prophet's death, kind of, or in the prophet's era. To me, there were a lot of just listening to your parents and trusting them, like, oh, okay, I guess that's part of reality that I haven't learned about yet. But that kind of stuff, it never really sat with me. Like, I wasn't convinced 100%. I was more like doubting myself instead of doubting the piece of information. So I feel more relieved now. Sometimes I wonder if I would be happier if I was the kind of person who would be in ignorance and bliss rather than the conflict. I don't know. What would you say, Jafar? Would you rather be an ignorance is bliss person?
Yeah, it's hard to say because religion wasn't really a huge part of my life. And also, you don't know what you don't know if you're living in ignorance is bliss. But no, I think that I would prefer to know and have all of the information.
Even if that information causes you to be more upset or conflicted or burdened?
It is really hard to say, because if you don't know, then you don't know what you're sparing yourself from, I guess you could say. But for example, from the point of view right now, would I choose to blindly believe Christianity, for example? I don't think that I would.
Wait, that was a complicated sentence. Would you choose to blindly believe Christianity? You don't think that you would choose to blindly believe?
No, I don't think I would. Again, it's hard to say from where I am right now, right? Because of what I believe about the world. But if I could snap my fingers and suddenly, I'm not an atheist and I'm Christian and I really believe it, I really still don't think I would want to, just because of how big a part of your life that can be, and it can, control your life in certain ways that you might not actually want.
So do you think that this is a very hypothetical scenario, because you can't choose to go back in time and become a blind believer, change your whole existence. But in that scenario, you could be a blind believer who's happy with complying. Like, everything that God told you to do is, even though it's affecting your life and it's maybe introducing some challenges, it brings you happiness. For some people, their circuits are wired that way. Do you think you would enjoy that life?
It's really hard to say if I would be happy with everything. This is a similar question to one we had one time that's not really about religion, which is basically, when you die, would you choose your life restarts over, but you don't remember anything, but you know that it's going to be a good life or something like that. I don't know if you remember that conversation or not.
I do,
And and at the time I said yes, because I would know that that version of me would be happy, even though, maybe there's hardship along the way or something, but he would end up happy. So it is a similar question, I guess, but we're just replacing arbitrary happiness with religious happiness. So maybe my biases right now are influencing my decision. I think it's because it would be religion. That's why I would lean toward no.
Why? Because it would be religion.
Christianity, for example, depending on the level and the adherence to it, can really dictate a lot about a person's life and take away some personal freedoms. So it would be on the principle of that.
Right. But in the mind of that believer, these personal freedoms are harmful. So therefore...
Are not harmful. The freedoms are harmful, you mean? Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So in the mind of that version of me who doesn't know about anything that happened before he woke up and was a devout Christian, he would be happy. So it would be from the point of view of me now, even though he would be happy, it's I guess it's easy to conflate this with, would I become religious again now, right?
Yeah.
I guess in theory, I'm okay with a version of me being happy as long as he is happy, but me now doesn't like that would be religion filling that gap just based on, the horrible things that have been justified with religion.
Yeah, I feel like I would have a similar answer, because I would think that person would kind of be the exception to the norm. The person who is controlled by every aspect of the religion and is happy about it, and isn't, there's no anxiety coming out of that, and they're not causing harm because of their religion, or it's not causing internal conflict. All of that is a very idealistic scenario, which
But
ideal may not. Yeah, go ahead.
even hypothetically, if that was true, for me, it's more about the principle of that being what is filling the void in their life, that being religion.
Interesting.
Not religion, not that religion in and of itself is bad, but I don't know, from what I've seen, some people that I know, it becomes a part of your life and doesn't leave room for you to be your own person sometimes.
Yeah. This is a bad analogy, but I'm on the spot right now. I can't think of a better one. It's like if I was told in a different reality, you could be a very functional, happy alcoholic who isn't going to die early because of health issues, is not going to affect anyone negatively, but that's going to be a happy life. I would say, because of the method of getting there, no, even though I know in this person's life it's going to work out, as a general rule, that is not a good formula, to apply. That's how I think of it. Can everybody hear me in the in the chat? Because Jafar just sent me a private message saying they cannot hear me. Or okay, they can't speak. Maybe they'll reconnect. If everyone everyone else can hear me. Okay, Jafar is going to be back in a second. Let me look at the questions that maybe he would not have answered anyway. Apostate Aladdin Jafar, do you feel more responsible with your life now you left Islam? Do you take responsibility more? Jafar was never a Muslim, but I'm guessing then the question would be to me. Yes, because I feel like no one is watching to write the scales, or if I did a sin or if I harmed someone before, aside from making it right with them, if possible, I would think I'll just pray or do good deeds to kind of, or appease God or ask God for forgiveness, and that is going to even the scales somehow. Now I realize there are no scales as far as I know, so it's up to me to make sure that I right the wrong in a sense. And that there's nothing out there that's going to magically, or at least there's no indication that my wishes or prayers or vibes that I give off to the ether are going to make something happen for me or not happen. So it's kind of up to me. Yeah. So I'll bring back Jafar. Say something.
Testing.
Yep, can hear you fine.
Okay, great.
Yeah, all right. I'll get to another question. I guess this could be for both of us, but I think it's more to me. They're asking, Aich, I think is how you pronounce the name. They're asking, I don't know how to articulate that, but did you ever feel angry after realizing that it all doesn't make sense? Feeling like, why didn't I reach that conclusion earlier? Or feel like you were tricked for so many years and angry for all the guilt, fear, and other negative feelings that you had when you believed? Do you identify with any of that, Jafar?
I was fairly young, so I don't really have any anger or animosity.
Okay. That's a question, by the way. Is Jafar non-binary? I noticed you said them. No, I referred to you as a he, right?
Maybe you said them at one point. Yeah, he's fine.
Yeah. It sometimes it just helps to be gender neutral. It encompasses, everything. So, to answer this question before I move on to the next one, I know the feeling that you're talking about here. I feel like because of religion, I'm inclined to feel guilty more often, and this is something that sticks even later. Um, and sorry, give me a second. One of my cats is messing with the TV for some reason. Jafar, can you vamp for a moment?
Okay, sure. So yeah, the anger and animosity, I don't think I had that. I guess one thing that I had was wondering, we were talking a bit about this earlier. When you're a kid, you take what your parents say at face value, and then there comes a day where you realize that, well, they are just people who are doing their best. And I guess I wondered, well, if I don't believe this, then why do my parents think this or other family members? So I did ask them a bit about that, and they had their reasons, which weren't convincing for me, but that's okay. They have their reasons as well. So that's probably the closest I had to some sort of feeling when I realized I didn't believe.
Right. So you're not the angry atheist that I thought you were, or I would have presumed you were. Yeah, and to answer their question myself, um, no, anger is not the right word for me, but I understand why you'd feel that way. A bit of betrayal, maybe at first, um, like, but then that went away because I realized the people around me didn't trick me intentionally into something that they don't believe in. They truly believe this stuff, so they didn't betray me. My own mind didn't betray me for letting me believe this for so long. If anything, you should celebrate the fact that eventually you reached a conclusion and you weren't stuck in that almost self-harm kind of limbo where you blame yourself and feel guilty that you don't, you can't arrive at a conclusion, or that the conclusion is blasphemous or wrong. So try to look at the glass half full approach, which is, at least I eventually reached that conclusion. And don't cry over spilt milk. Yeah. Any thoughts, Jafar?
No, that's pretty well said. Water under the bridge, and it's like negative aspects in life in general. It's frustrating that it happened, but it does allow you to learn more about yourself and the world and move on from it.
Yeah. I'm going to take a couple more questions, by the way, and unless Jafar, you want to talk about anything else, we can close after that.
That sounds good.
Gabe was asking, are you going to host Why You Don't Believe series? Yes, I have a live stream for, actually the next one this upcoming weekend is for ex-Muslims to call in and talk. So there's going to be a bit of Why Don't You Believe, but sure. When I can, I'll be hosting another one, but it might be a while, maybe a month or so for one of those. But rest assured, it will happen eventually. Yeah, and so far, no more questions, but Islam Channel says, yes, you are watching your parents grow too, trying to figure this thing called life. Yeah,
Exactly.
they mean well.
Parents, us, everyone's always growing and learning.
Yeah, I mean, think about especially the people from backgrounds where parents, or even in the previous generations, parents used to have children very young. So when I think of myself today at my current age, having a child today without the background knowledge of the internet and all my experiences, and uh, we've accelerated things like therapy and open communication and all that kind of stuff. People didn't have access to that back then. They were just playing it on hard mode, kind of raising kids.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm wondering, how do you think this conversation went, Jafar?
Oh, it's very interesting. Yeah, we talk about religion, of course, outside of this, but it is nice to have, dedicated time to say this is what we're going to talk about and get into some questions that I don't think we've necessarily asked each other, or at least not in a while. And also just to remember some of the conversations that we used to have and to understand a bit more what you were thinking at that time.
And like you said, you brought up a very good example of the kind of question that I believe I had asked you that question. It wasn't religious, but it was religion adjacent, about if you could be reborn again or reincarnated, knowing. So this was the question: if you could be reincarnated and forget your past life, but you know that you're gonna have a happy life, would you do it? Would you authorize that that transition? And your answer was yes, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of question that we would just randomly be talking about, not necessarily specifically religion. But yeah, it was nice to be able to reminisce on some of these things and remember the vodka in the freezer and everything else that happened back then.
The dancing.
The dancing, yeah. Oh God, I still cringe thinking of the fact that I did that sober. But hey,
Yeah.
that was, pushing my limits.
I'll give a little more detail for some people. I got up on his shoulders.
Yeah. I gave you a ride, and you were the one who was inebriated, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what motivated me to go with the flow on that one.
But it
Yeah.
was fun though. We could have those conversations and do stuff like that, and it's pretty normal interactions. Religion was just kind of one conversation topic that we would have.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again for coming and agreeing to this conversation. I don't remember if you suggested it in the past or I did, but I know
We've
you're open to it.
definitely talked about it in the past, and then we both were busy, but finally we were able to make it happen. So I'm glad that we did this. It was very fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks again for doing this, and yeah, thanks everyone for watching us today and for contributing with your questions and your comments and everything. And as always, think critically and think for yourself.